Em 60 anos, o Brasil cresceu muito e o BNDES faz parte dessa história. Quando o banco foi criado, muitos produtos eram importados e de difícil acesso. Hoje, eles são fabricados aqui e até exportados. No início da década de 50, 40% das residências tinham água encanada. Agora são mais de 80%. BNDES, há 60 anos, no dia a dia dos brasileiros, trabalhando pelo futuro do país. BNDES, o Banco Nacional do Desenvolvimento.
Bom, boa tarde, todo mundo. Bem-vindos a mais uma sessão do Fórum. A Laika já participou do festival. Para quem não sabe, eles fizeram Coraline. É um parceiro querido do festival. E nós estamos aqui de novo. Mark, inclusive, já veio. O Mark está voltando para o festival e vai falar para vocês um pouco da especialidade dele, que é Branding Management, gerenciamento de marcas, principalmente para estúdios grandes, como a Laika, para produções grandes, como o Coraline, que eles estão fazendo, e agora para a Norman. E de lambuja, o Mark ainda trouxe umas surpresas muito legais, que são alguns elementos, algumas peças inéditas do Coraline. Não vou matar a surpresa, não. E alguns trechos inéditos também do longa que eles vão lançar agora para a Norman. Então, eu gostaria de agradecer muitíssimo o Mark, a presença do Mark, um grande parceiro da gente, e passar a palavra para ele. Thank you very much. The ball is you now.
Thank you. Obrigado. Obrigado. Sorry, I mispronounced the name. Thank you very much for having me here at the festival. I apologize in advance that I don't speak Portuguese. I barely speak English very well, but I know we have a couple of English speakers here. And as he mentioned, my name is Mark Shapiro, and I'm head of marketing and brand management for Laika. We're an animation studio in the United States in Portland, Oregon, and our history goes back to the days of Will Vinton Studios. And how many people have heard of Will Vinton Studios? Claymation. So we go back more than 30 years of animation. Our company was rebranded Laika in 2005, and Laika is named after the dog. It's a Russian word for the dog that went into space. Maybe some of you know who that is. And the dog did not come back, but we have a tradition of animators at Laika, almost like a group of independent filmmakers, all the way from the CEO, the head of the company, whose name is Travis Knight, all the way down to just about everyone considers themselves like a filmmaker or an animator. And we come from a large, long tradition of, am I going too fast, by the way? That's okay. Okay, a long tradition of great animators from the city of Portland, Oregon, where I live, including Bill Plimpton, who's been here before, and Will Vinton, another woman named Joan Gratz, and Jim Blashfield, Matt Groening. You've all seen The Simpsons. He's from Portland, and many of the references in The Simpsons come from streets in Portland. Like, I don't know, maybe they changed the names here, but it's a long tradition of animation. And our company has two sides to it, which Kirk Kelly came from the advertising side of the company, which is called Like a House. And we do advertisements in 2D, in 3D, or CG, and stop motion. And then the entertainment side of our company does films. We did a short film called Moon Girl. Has anybody seen Moon Girl here? Okay, I brought it with me so I could show you. It's a CG film. And that was our first ever entertainment content directed by Henry Selick, and I'll introduce that in a minute. And then we did Coraline in 2009, and Coraline was screened here in 2009. That came out in February of 2009. And in 2012, we this summer we will be debuting Paranorman. Has anybody seen anything from that? I brought lots of things from Paranorman, and if everybody stays here, I can show you puppets at the very end. We'll have time to do pictures with the puppets and questions and answers. We'll have plenty of time for that. But they tell me that we have to line up in an orderly fashion because things get kind of knocked over, and then we have to be out here for another presentation at 5 o'clock, but maybe a little bit before 5. So what I want to do first is show the first piece, and it kind of gives a little bit of background on the company, and then we'll get into some of the time lapses and behind the scenes. And don't worry about translation because after it's done, I'll come back and I can translate anything you want because some of these things have not been seen at all outside of here. And I want to give you the chance to kind of look at them and tell all of your friends about this movie. We're a smaller studio than some of the other ones. We're bigger than some studios, but we really rely on people who love animation, who love stop motion, and sort of creative process. So we'll have, again, plenty of time for question and answer. We have several things to look at. So let's start with this. This is sort of a background on our company, and then I'll come back. Again, if translation didn't come through, basically the short side of that whole thing is, first of all, that was narrated by the CEO of our company, Travis Knight, who is an accomplished animator. I'm going to show you some of the animation that he's done. So he comes to work in the morning. Often his car is there before, well, it's always there before mine for some reason. But he gets there early and he animates in the morning, and then in the afternoon he's doing some signing checks and taking care of company business. So as I said, everybody in the company is really grounded in this idea and this love of storytelling, of animation, and things handcrafted, made by hand. You got to look at where we live. We're not in Hollywood. We're in this small town up in the crazy Pacific Northwest, and hopefully all of you will come visit Portland because there's a lot going on in the city right now, and it's a really fun place to be. I'm going to go next to show you our first CG film that I mentioned, which is Moon Girl. And just to give you an idea of the breadth of what we do at Leica, this is our, it was our first CG short, as I mentioned. It's our only short. And it was directed by Henry Selick, who would then go on to direct Coraline. And he had already directed Nightmare Before Christmas and James and the Giant Peach, among others. So I'm going to go ahead and roll this one. And this is Moon Girl. And then we'll come back in and start talking about some of the stop motion at Leica. But again, this gives you an example of kind of what we're working on and the types of technologies we have. So we can do number 2 now. That was our first ever sort of venture into the world of CG. We've been doing it from the commercial side of the company. Now we had CG that we could master from the entertainment side of the company. And later this would come in handy because of our next 2 productions that we were going to shock the world with. The first being Coraline in 2009, which came out to really great reviews, high expectations from the novella from Neil Gaiman. And do you read it here in Brazil too? It's very popular in the United States and obviously in England, where Mr. Gaiman is from. So in that time, Henry Selick had joined Leica and had this idea with the producers and with the heads of the company who wanted to make this film, Coraline, in stop motion, which is that art form that's just this medieval art form with puppets. A lot of the animators grew up animating G.I. Joes. I don't know if you have those here. Little puppets that you can move frame by frame by frame. They would just shoot them with their own cameras, and that's what Henry Selick grew up doing. And he wanted to make this movie desperately to make it, and so put together this incredible studio in Hillsboro, Oregon, which is about 20 miles west of Portland, and it's a giant studio. And I have a lot of things. I'll show you what the studio looks like on the inside. It's probably the floor itself. It's a giant room about 3 football pitches big. That's how big it is. And we can set up about 50 stages for our first production, Coraline. And for that, I brought some things here. We set up an entire department that starts obviously with the 2D drawings and then leading into computer and then the creation of this right here. Does anybody know what this is? It's an armature, and I think we have a small enough crowd. I want to pass this around. You can take pictures of it if you want, for those of you who can't come up later to see it. This is inside of every puppet that can animate. The whole secret to animation is just being able to move something frame by frame by frame. And we animate how many frames a second? Anybody have any ideas? 24. So 24 frames per second. Coraline was 100 minutes long. So I don't know what the math is, even in English, but it's a lot of frames of animation. 24, 24 frames in 1 second times 60 seconds for 1 minute times 100 minutes. And then everything is multiplied by 2. Why? 3D. So the movie was shot in 3D, native 3D from the very beginning, using small cameras. On the Paranorman production, we're using Canon 5D cameras. You might even have those at home. Really strong cameras. They hold up really well. I'm going to pass this around so you guys can have a look and just make sure I get it back. Can you pass this around so you can see it? So that's inside every puppet. And for example, I have Coraline here, and you can see, I'll have her later so you can take pictures of her, and you can hold her and everything. Now, this puppet was made from the ground up. Again, you start with a 2D drawing, right? Then it gets put into computers, and it's then created, and everything has to be created from this puppet, built around that armature that you're holding right there. On the inside of this puppet is an armature that holds it, the metal skeleton. Now, the other part of Coraline, so again, costume department, armature department on the inside. There's a hair department. If her hair is animated, you saw the early scenes where her hair falls down. Everything has to be able to be animated, including this sweater, by the way. This was knit by a woman that our puppet fab supervisor, whose name is Georgina Haynes, went on Google and Googled miniature sweater knitter, and we found her in the Midwest of the United States. And so she made, for instance, this star sweater. Now, the other thing about a puppet like this is it has replacement faces. And the way that works is, and you can take closer, better pictures of this later, the faces actually come off the puppet, if that makes sense, and they're snapped in frame by frame by frame, 24 frames per second. Okay, sorry. I'm supposed to move back here. I like to be closer to the audience. So again, frame by frame. So faces can be replaced, and I will show you when you come up afterwards what they look like. But just to give you an example, and you saw how this face can be, there's magnets on the back of the face. Better? And it's snapped in like that, okay? So again, that's animated 24 frames in a second, so that would work with the faces too. So whenever an animator would go to a stage and to a set, they would carry with them a drawer of faces like this. These are actually made on a 3D printer. In the very first scene that I showed you, you saw that machine going back and forth, the color machine. That's the 3D printer. And for Coraline, we made these faces in, this is a Coraline face, in black and white, printing in black and white. They had to be individually sanded and painted. Thousands of faces to snap in for just that one frame. And Coraline, when you can actually do the brow. This is actually from Paranorman. But you can do the brow or the bottom of the face. And with the different facial combinations, Coraline had over 215,000 facial expressions. Not faces, but actual possible expressions, about 215,000, okay? On a production like Nightmare Before Christmas, where the director used replacement heads, I think it was 15 to 20,000 faces. And then when we start talking about Paranorman and we started using color printers, where we don't have to individually paint them, we printed over almost 34,000 faces. And Norman himself actually has 1.3 million different facial expressions. So he can practically do, I was at a panel the other day and the panelists asked, or the moderator asked, how many faces do people have? I guess it's infinity. But Paranorman can do about 1.3 million, which is pretty remarkable. So you'll see some, we'll talk a little bit about the 3D printer and I can answer questions about that later. But we have the replacement animated faces. We also have mechanically animated faces. Mechanical animation is like a rubber face, or it's sort of a rubber material that can be moved frame by frame. It has an internal armature in the head. Does that make sense to everyone, how that works? So basically that's what it is. We're working, like I said before, a medieval idea animating frame by frame by frame in this 21st century world where everything is CG. But I want to show you what it looks like behind the scenes of Coraline first, and kind of show you what it looks like, again, going frame by frame by frame, except the cameras, of course, are sped up. Otherwise, we'd be sitting here for hours before I play this. An animator can typically animate about 3 seconds per week. So that's actually a pretty fast animator. I don't know if there are any animators out there, but you'd agree that that's pretty fast. And if we had 30 or 40 animators, we averaged about 90 seconds per week. And then we can watch dailies on a full screen 3D capable theater. When you do have the faces, I showed you Coraline where she has the upper seam and the lower seam. There's upper face and lower face. There's actually a natural seam that exists between the two, and those are individually colored out with CG. So that is one of the jobs at Leica is facial removal. They actually remove the seams frame by frame. But I want to show you this piece here because it's much more fun than hearing me talk about what the studio looks like. And we'll go ahead and roll number 3. This is sort of the life of an animator at Leica. And I can come back and answer questions about what he's saying if he says it kind of quickly. But I wanted you to get an idea of what it takes to do just one frame of animation. This is not a second of animation. This is actually a frame of animation. So we'll go ahead and roll. I think this is number what? 4? Yes. Sorry. We play that sometimes for little animation students to scare them away from ever coming to work on an animated film, because you can see what goes into it, all the everything, all the effort. And again, I should also talk about the people that build all the sets. Everything has to be built for this purpose. So we start off, we build this entire world for Coraline, for instance, and then when we're done with principal shooting, everything comes down. We waited. Actually, during the time between Coraline and Paranorman, we had a completely open room, 3 soccer pitches big. So there were tennis courts people set up, and they were riding around on bicycles and things like that, just this huge open space. But then we got down to serious business, and we're ready for the next production. But again, that gives you an idea of everything. There's people in construction, set design. You have draftspeople, basically architects building homes with, sometimes with electricity, exterior shots, indoor shots. We're also using, again, a lot of practical light and a lot of sort of little techniques. As the art of animation and the art of stop motion moves forward, we try to sort of stay ahead of the game so we can create something even more remarkable, which leads us to Paranorman. So again, we can come back and talk about questions about Coraline, but Paranorman, our second entertainment release, will be actually debuts really worldwide up in Mexico on, that's cool that I could say up in Mexico, because usually it's down, and anyway. It debuts in Mexico on August 3rd, and in the United States on the 17th of August. And I think next, it'll be in September here in Brazil, but if you want to go to Mexico and see it early, you could go up there. But it will be there on the 3rd of August, and then again, goes into more worldwide release on the 17th. And from there, it goes, just different countries will release it on a different schedule depending on what else is going out in theaters. Focus Features and Universal are the distributors of the film. And so I'm sorry, we're good? Okay. And I'm going to show you, again, some little pieces that we have from Paranorman, plus I brought some puppets, including Norman himself. But let's see, the movie was an original story written by Chris Butler, who was head of story on Coraline, and it's co-directed by Chris Butler and Sam Fell, who you may recognize from Aardman, DreamWorks. He directed Flushed Away and Tale of Despero, 2 movies that I'm sure everybody saw, or a lot of people saw. So, and then we also had a lot of the same people from Coraline. We had the same head of puppet fabrication, Georgina Haynes from England. Deb Cook did all the costume design, also from England. We have a great armature team headed up by, that's those same departments. And Nelson Lowry did the production design. And he's worked on a lot of movies, including Fantastic Mr. Fox, where he did that design. A lot of the movies, people will ask questions Do we have a lot of permanent employees? We do have a lot of permanent employees, and some that come from one production to the next. Some worked on Coraline, then went to work on Frankenweenie or possibly Pirates, and then came back to work for us, and maybe Fantastic Mr. Fox also, and then came back to work for us on the new production, Paranorman. So I'm going to start off first by playing this is the US domestic trailer for Paranorman, and then we'll kind of go more behind the scenes and talk about what's going on. But here's the trailer. Okay, thanks. You can see a lot of influences from some of the, like John Carpenter and also John Hughes from those days. A lot of the directors talked about that, sort of fusing these different ideas, Breakfast Club and movies like that, along with some of these scary movies that came out when they were growing up in the 80s. So there's an idea of the movie, and what I want to do now is show some kind of behind the scenes. Again, this is in English, and we can come back and translate things if they go too fast. They're just sort of talking about the making of the film, and we'll come back with questions if you want to roll this one. Okay. So we have to deal with marketing in a little different way, talking about the film, than other studios. Some studios have more ability to talk about their film if they have an amusement park, for instance, or if they sell goods in stores or things like that. We have to rely a lot on people like you sort of circulating what you saw today, or seeing things on the net, or friends, other animators. So we work with an agency to create little vignettes that kind of talk about the behind the scenes or the making of, similar to what you saw, but much shorter. And I brought with me 4 today, I think. And I wanted you to see them because they just came out. One of them came out today. So what happens is these will get released in places that, like online, or maybe through YouTube or through another partner that we have. And then they just individually get circulated through the internet and through other people, word of mouth, and that gets people coming back and coming to the theaters, hopefully on August 3rd in Mexico and August 17th here, in the US, and in September. So we're gonna go ahead and roll these last 4. You can actually roll them one after the other, and then each one I think is about 2 minutes long. And when we're done with that, we'll open this up to Q&A, and then you'll have plenty of time to come up here and take pictures and ask other questions. So again, these 4 you can just roll right after each other, if that makes sense. If it doesn't, I'll come out and say that. Okay, we'll go with the first one. All right, I think that was our last one. Thank you guys up there, obrigado, for doing that in order. I appreciate that. That last vignette that you just saw came out today, so hopefully you'll see it more and more. Again, they'll get circulated online, and you're supposed to kind of find them yourselves, and they hopefully will come to you. If you're into animation, you'll see the next one, which will be out on the 23rd, I believe, and that'll happen every couple weeks. You'll see a new thing until the premiere of the movie, and anyway, I really wanted there was a lot of information in the wrong language for this country, which again, I apologize for. So what I want to do now is maybe open it up to some questions, and then we'll bring the puppets up here and you can take a look at them and take pictures. And so why don't we just go ahead and start? Yeah. Does anybody have, okay, we have a question in the back. Yes, you in the white shirt? Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. I think I can actually hear you. I can sort of hear you anyway. Okay.
Hi.
Hi.
It's Adriana, and I want to know if Leica makes its own armature parts, or do you work with a model making company? And how would you say the market for stop motion animators is at the moment? Because you said animators go back and forth from the UK to the US, and I know there's loads of people who are into stop motion, but that's not really what you get in volume for the market. So you have to sort of go around CG and 2D. And for me, specifically, it's not a thing I can do. I can do stop motion. So.
Okay, thank you, Adriana, right? Armatures are made on site. You saw that some of them were, where's the armature now? Somewhere floating around there? That's actually, the one you have there, that's the Coraline armature, and that was made mostly at our studio. Part of it was, we do a lot of collaborative work, even in the beginning, with some of the studios in Northern England, especially McKinnon and Saunders and Cosgrove Hall. Two places that are, so much great animation has come from that area, and so much stop motion has come from that area. So we've had influence from there, but we're trying to do as much as we can locally. My friends from New Zealand had asked me about Oregon and the sort of style of Oregon. We're about sustainability. We like to create things right there. We like to recycle as much as we can. We like to do things. So part of what we do is we source local products so they would be made there. In terms of the animators, we're sourcing them from around the world because they're, as you saw from, even the two directors are from England, Puppet Fab supervisor from the UK, head costume designer from the UK. So a lot of English influence, again, coming from studios like Aardman and places like that from England where there's just so much history. So many of the artists that we have are strict stop motion animators, and they learn that skill, not necessarily taught that skill, many times it's self-taught, because if you animate in stop motion, you know, if anybody does, it's very much a personal thing, and you really, it's hard to be taught it. You need to actually do it, to get in there and do it. That said, there are people that do 2D and CG or 3D animation who also do stop motion. And as I said before, we're doing things on the commercial level. Some of our commercials are stop motion commercials. And so there's quite a bit of market, strong market for that. The stop motion animators are sought after because, especially if they can go, if they're accurate and fast, because we have a very strict timeline, obviously, like any studio. So that's a big part of it. So I would just say to keep at it. And if you're interested, by the way, in job information for the company, we have a careers link on the website that talks about every one of the job openings. And we do recruiting events at several festivals. We've had people here before. Last 3 years ago, we had a master class that was taught by one of our directors. And anyway, that would be more information about recruiting would be found on Leica.com. And you can go and find specific job listings. But again, this is a very long answer to your question. But we're sourcing people not only from great universities, but also people that maybe never attended university, but are great animators.
Oi, boa tarde, meu nome é Daniela e eu gostaria de saber, por favor.
Yes.
Tudo certo? Meu nome é Daniela, boa tarde. Eu gostaria de saber, em termos de animação, na hora da produção, como é que é feito para marcar o timing, o espaçamento da animação? É direto no stop motion ou primeiro tem que fazer essa animação em 3D ou 2D para testar?
Okay, I think I got it. So the question for the English speakers is, how do we, I think you're asking, do we do run-throughs first with CG and drawn? This is very much like a live-action movie, where you would start with a story, then a script, and then we do run-throughs in, usually with, you saw some of the animatics, so the early designs to get an idea of the pace of a set and of a scene. So usually, yes, it would start drawn, then it would start with, we would do the actual drawing of what the characters look like. Then we do a run through just like you would do on a live action movie, where you would have blocking time, rehearsal time, and everything put together so that they're seamless, so the scene can be done seamlessly when the animators will come in and do the animation. Does that begin to answer the question? Also, the voice cast, if you're interested, all the voiceovers are done before. So the animators are animating to the actors' voices. The actors, almost all of the actors' voices were picked up in Los Angeles. So that was one thing that we had to do to go to Hollywood to get our cast, which includes Cody Smith-McPhee from the movie The Road. Did anybody see The Road? Hopefully, he's an actor from Australia. Then Christopher Mintz-Plasse. If anybody saw Superbad, the movie, remember McLovin? We got him. Christopher Mintz-Plasse plays a bully in this movie, which is interesting for him to go against character. So everything is picked up there. Also, Casey Affleck and John Goodman are also voices for Paranorman, and Anna Kendrick. So that's sort of how it goes. Very, very old-fashioned. So they do everything sort of on the site, but lots of rehearsal. There's so much rehearsal time built in, so that the animators can just go in and make their moves and work on sounds and things like that.
Hi.
Yeah, sorry.
Hi, I'm Barbara. I just wanted some details. I don't know if you have already said that, but it just arrived, I don't know, 5 or 10 minutes late. So if you could just tell me. I would just like to know the budget of the film. How long did it take you from the beginning, from the screenwriting to the post-animation? And how long did you work, and which were the steps from the pre-production? How was it, and what did you have to do before start shooting it? So if you could just give a little explanation about the pre-production part.
Okay, so the first question was the budget. The budget, we don't have a final number yet for the new production. For Coraline, it was 85 million US dollars. 85 million, which sounds like a lot. It's about the same for a high-level CG production. In terms of what it brought back, about Coraline so far worldwide has brought back maybe close to 130 million dollars worldwide so far. Okay, that was question 1. 2 was maybe the process. How long did it take? For Chris Butler, the writer he's the director and also based on his story, he said it's taken him maybe 16 years of his life thinking about this movie, but in actual time started back maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and then that was when he started writing his script and putting it down, and then the actual time to produce the movie, anywhere from 1.5 to 2 years, sometimes maybe 2.5 years. In this movie, the main difference between this movie and a lot of the past movies, even in stop motion, is the influence of CG or 3D. It's a significant part of this film. There's a lot of special effects, a lot of visual effects in CG. So that we're making a stop motion film with a lot of CG elements, influences, but total time maybe 2.5 to 3 years for production. And the other part of the question, the pre-production time. Pre-production steps. First of all, we're actually in pre-production on a new production, and we have a 3-picture deal with Focus Features and Universal. Coraline was 1, Paranorman is 2, and the 3rd film will be announced shortly. It's out there, and they're actually in pre-production. Pre-production is actually the next step after pre-production. Studios can have 5, 10, depending on the size of the studio, they can have several films in that sort of early production stage, which is not pre-production. But pre-production involves, first of all, acquiring the story, sometimes purchasing the rights to the story or an original story, then going through working on scripts. Sometimes you have several writers on per script, and then you go to the visuals, the character. That could be early, and just like any movie, you might have 10 character designers from around the world, different designers. Some are on staff at Leica, some are freelance designers. For this production, there was a woman named Heidi Smith, and she's fresh out of CalArts, which is in Valencia, California. It's where Leia Segure, who's one of the directors of this festival, attended. It's a great school, but that can take sort of a number of years. So probably, but the steps would determine how long something would take. So anywhere from could be 3.5 years. You have the initial story, the tweaks, the cuts, going back and forth between not only our creative team and also the production staff, but potentially the distributors if they're involved with any kind of, if they have a say in the production. But all said, you know, again, that time frame, 3 to 5 years, and that's usually similar timing to a major CG production. So the timing and the cost would be about the same between a stop motion production and a CG production. Did that answer everything? That was a lot of questions. Got them all in. I hopefully got them. Was it anything else? That's fine. Okay.
Here. I was wondering how your process, if you could describe a little bit of the lip sync process when you work with dialogue, and or if you use any other kind of sound which is not dialogue to guide the animation, like sound effects or music, and how do you make the synchronization for that? If it's the same for the CG process, if it's different for stop motion. Because you use prototypes, that kind of stuff, you use the same process as CG.
It's a great question. One of the things that we worked on for the voiceover talent, we had everybody in the room at the same time talking, or sometimes we just have 2 people if they're interacting in a scene, as opposed to having a whole group of people just reading lines. We might bring 2 people that were significant parts of that scene together to work on the line together. And so you might, and 2 people, Anna Kendrick, who voices Courtney, which is the girl with the blonde ponytail, she was in a room with Christopher Mintz-Plasse, who was Alvin, and they were going back and forth with dialogue and literally like, you know, moving, you know, down and recording everything to really get into character. And so the process is maybe a little bit different than sometimes with CG. I've seen making of some of the CG movies where they just sit at a table and read lines. We're really encouraging them to feel comfortable in their characters and really let the characters come out. So there's a lot of sort of pre-rehearsal and making sure that the voices are right and that the interaction between the characters is accurate. So,
do you film the actors during the recording?
There is some filming of that. I haven't seen those behind the scenes yet, but I know there's some good ones that maybe on the Blu-ray. There's another reason to buy the Blu-ray. When that comes out, there hopefully will be some behind the scenes of that, because I mentioned Courtney, for her character, it was the first time she'd ever done animation. Now that's a challenge. You know, she's acting, but it's a different kind of action. For the sounds and everything, the animators will often wear earphones to pick up where their dialogue is coming from, and they can replace the faces and do what they need to do, and also add in sounds. The biggest difference between us now with stop motion and the face, where we have these 3D faces, faces that are printed with a 3D printer. If for some reason we want to have a different expression, we can make them. We made 34,000 faces. So let's say if an animator's in the middle of a sequence and he says, well, this is too much of a smile, I want more of like a stronger look, he can get that back to the production designer and the producers, and they can actually bake more faces. So that's a different thing. I mean, the same could be said for CG. You could just go back to the computer and do the same thing. For our process, it would be create a new face, go back, use Maya on the computer, create the face, and then on the 3D printer, print it out, and then it's like magic. It does take a little bit of time, though.
Hi. I wanted to know, like, how did Leica get started, and how did you guys get started on actually producing? Hi.
Sorry, I'm looking around.
And actually producing feature stop motion movies. Also, I wanted to know, like, if you get to keep the puppets, if you distribute the puppets, like, between the crew, and if you get each one of you get a puppet or something.
Good question. So Leica got started. I mentioned we came originally from Will Vinton Studios, Claymation Studios, and it became the love of stop motion sort of started there. And Travis Knight, who you saw, started out as a runner for Will Vinton. And basically what he did was he would go basically run and get coffee or do whatever it would take for that scene, and then worked his way up and taught himself how to animate. So the company is sort of born out of that tradition of stop motion, and that's where it comes from, the love of breathing life into individual characters. The idea that with the characters you have like with Coraline, so many different people touch this puppet before she's shot. We mentioned the armature department, the hair department, the costume department, just every little bit. So there's that love, the idea of what's brought forth with stop motion. It's a little bit, it's a different look and feel than CG. CG is so clean. Stop motion lends itself to quirkier stories. Like if you think about most stop motion movies, beyond Coraline and Paranorman, Nightmare Before Christmas, Fantastic Mr. Fox, Corpse Bride, these movies all have a different visual look and feel that wouldn't work in CG. Not only visually, but just the pace of the story. So basically that's the idea behind sort of this love of stop motion. Again, creating the characters in that style. I think Aardman with Pirates has done something, or even with Wallace and Gromit, has done something that's much lighter, that still works with stop motion, but goes a little bit against the grain, probably. And the second part of your question?
Oh, about the puppets.
Yeah.
If you keep them.
So the puppets. How many people saw Coraline? Did just about everybody here see it? Okay, good. Wow. So, do you remember the mice in the Mouse Circus?
Yeah.
I think they created more than 400 of those mice, and they actually were given to crew members as gifts in like a little display, almost like like you would see like a butterfly displayed. And the mice are about this big, and they don't really animate. They're just replaced. They don't have armatures in them. They were basically just almost like maquettes, and those were given as gifts to the crew. For the other puppets, like Coraline, I actually had to beg to bring her with me because they were using her as a stand-in for other productions. Like Norman, which you'll see in a second when I bring him out, he's just a little bit bigger than her, so she can serve as a stand-in during rehearsals and blocking, which goes back to your question about kind of what we do. It's almost like live action. These puppets are very difficult to create, and they're expensive, so we try to use them. And then in terms of the sets themselves, those are actually broken down and stored. They can be put back together, though. They can be put back together, sorry. We've done exhibits at different places. We'd love to maybe bring one here or something. We just need places to be able to store them. In the United States has maybe a different, there aren't as many places to put them on display. We do have some sets on display at different places like Universal Studios, or maybe we'll do one locally where we'll have sort of archives and things like that. But yeah, the puppets, they're not given away as, not the puppets, we still use those. But little props and things like that from the movies, those can be given away. I think there was another question in the back there somewhere.
Hi. Going to the market thing, how much would you... going to the market question, how much would you say of the budget would go into marketing the film? And how is social media affecting the marketing of Leica films?
Okay, it's a great question. I don't have the actual number for marketing, but it's significant. Maybe even beyond that budget would go to marketing. I've mentioned before, we have a real challenge when it comes to our films because we're not we're large in the sense, about 400 people, and the budget that I mentioned for Coraline. But some companies, animation studios, have had more ability to market. So again, that's why we create these things, which leads into your next question about social media. Incredibly important. For Coraline, we relied heavily on not only vignettes that we created that I have shown before, that again talk about sort of behind the scenes, the making of Coraline, like we did with Paranorman. But this becomes a significant part of what we're trying to do, because to get third-party endorsements or to get other people to talk about the movie is the best way for us to get it out there. And for Coraline, for instance, Neil Gaiman was a huge Twitter user. He tweeted a lot, and also Facebook and just other forums. Now we can use Tumblr, we use Twitter, we still use Facebook. Neil Gaiman has tweeted about Paranorman, which is great. Same thing with Henry Selick. He has a lot of fans. Like if we go to an event like Comic-Con, Neil Gaiman is mobbed. He's probably one of the most popular people at Comic-Con beyond maybe Angelina Jolie. But he talks about it and gets that sort of social network going for us, for our film. word of mouth is tremendous. And again, we do some advertising, but the things you're likely to see would be the pieces that I showed you here. Cost, it's really difficult to put a monetary amount towards that. It's something that we don't necessarily release, but it would go beyond that $85 million budget. Any other questions? Are we good? What's our time like? 1 second. Check my old-fashioned clock here. Okay. So what I'll do is, why don't maybe let's see, who's going to help sort of usher people up here? Yeah. Oh, there you are. So I'm going to bring these things up here and come up one by one, and we can, or however you want to do this in an orderly fashion. I'll set them up here, and then you can take pictures. The armature and core line you can hold, and Norman is still being used, so we can't hold him, I don't think. Well, I'll see if we can, and then I brought a zombie too. So come on up. Thank you guys very much for everything. Obrigado. Very, very interesting. Thank you.
A gente também vai ter copo de leite no salão do